Greetings, you're listening to Guiding Stars Evolutionary Astrology Radio. This is your host, Kristin Fontana. Guiding Stars is an interactive, soul-centered astrology talk show using the symbolic language of evolutionary astrology to enlighten and empower you on this journey. I'm here today with Deva Green, and we've been working through a series on the phasal relationship between Jupiter and Mercury in your chart. And we have made it all the way to the last quarter phase. We have one more phase to go after this. So there are 8 phases in total. We've reached 7. So I'd like to welcome Deva back to Guiding Stars. Welcome back.
Thank you.
And anything you would like to announce before we get started?
Call for translators said it's really a super exciting time. We've had various Jeffrey Wolf Green books translated into a variety of languages, and if you'd like to be a part of helping the school and also learning evolutionary astrology at the same time, please give me an email and we'll go from there. Big thank you to all of our translators and all your hard work.
All right, and since we're talking about Jupiter and Mercury, the last quarter phase, I'm just going to let people know that I've been editing a wonderful book by Deva Green that will be here out in the world before long on the moon. Hopefully, definitely be in 2019. I'll give you that. So there's also another book that will be coming out on Ceres, and so there's just a lot being written right now. Jupiter and Mercury phase, and thinking about insights, thinking about the written word, and thinking about expanding your consciousness and your understanding of your place in the world. So that's one way to make that happen. Tuning into webinars such as this, where you're learning more about these galactic influences and the planetary configurations that reflect who you are, your thumbprint. And so I'm excited to continue on to our next phase, Jupiter, Mercury, last quarter phase. Let's go ahead and put up the diagram in case somebody's just joining us for the first time. And for those of you who are just getting into this, we're going to give you just a general backdrop on what we're looking at it. Planetary phases and aspects are revealed here in this image, and it's the soul's evolutionary roadmap, essentially. This little wheel reflects the principles of evolution, just like the wheel of the zodiac, from Aries to Pisces. Same thing, just a lot of different words that may not look familiar to you if you're new to this. It's important to remember that so you don't get confused. You just look at that house that says new phase and know that Aries starts there at that 0-degree conjunction line. The difference between this wheel and what you might be used to seeing in a chart, a regular horoscope or a chart of your own, is that the phases are broken into 8 instead of 12. Obviously in the zodiac we have 1 through 12 representing Aries to Pisces. Now we have 8 from the new phase all the way to the balsamic phase. Now the cycle of phases and aspects will tell you what stage of evolution your soul is in relative to the 2 planets that you are looking at, as well as how those 2 planets operate archetypically. So to determine the phase, we're putting Jupiter here at the 0 conjunction line. You can go ahead and find your Jupiter in your chart and make that a 0 conjunction, and then count the degrees all the way around the wheel, moving counterclockwise as we've done here to reach the last quarter phase. Slower moving planet Jupiter here, Mercury is faster. Obviously, if we were looking at 2 other planets, like let's say we're looking at Saturn and Jupiter, then we would make Saturn that stationary point at the 0 and then find our way counterclockwise to find Jupiter, since Saturn is slower. Okay, so remember too that this is a planetary phase between these archetypes, and this is woven in obviously to the Pluto paradigm that we work with in evolutionary astrology. It's important to remember that this is just a little piece of it. Couple players on the stage. But in general, it takes 8 lifetimes at minimum to work through the specific intention that is reflected in the main Pluto paradigm. And there are also subsidiary lives that occur after, say, a primary life, may have happened. There's 8 primary lifetimes again at minimum. So Deva, maybe you can talk about the different gates. What makes something a primary life?
Yes, you'll look at the stressful aspects, the ones that are in red, to see the major primary lifetimes. And the primary lifetimes are when the current evolutionary karmic dynamics are being directly worked on. They're lifetimes where you're confronting, where you're really working towards in a direct way the evolutionary intentions for the life. Whereas a non-primary life or a subsidiary life, which usually follows a primary life, is a necessary cool down break. It's a time of not working on them directly as you were with a primary life. So if you see that you're in a primary lifetime, the sense of evolution can be intensified, or a feeling of facing things head on, so to speak. And when you're in a subsidiary life, those will be conditions where you feel that it can be a feeling of, yeah, I directly worked on that just a while ago. So now I'm going to go ahead and cool down, take a little break, get geared up for the next primary life. So it's a emotional psychological dynamic of, from my understanding, either intensification and facing things directly, or whether it's in a phase where things are not being as directly confronted or worked through.
Right. So, well, conjunctions, oppositions, squares. One thing that we do include in a primary life is a trine.
Mm.
That's the one blue aspect there. But right, and so I think the most important thing to remember too is that until the intent of your soul is fulfilled at a specific gate, gates can be looked at from the different phases, moving in from one phase to the next, those gates in particular, or even moving out of a primary aspect like a conjunction, a square, opposition, a
Mm-hmm.
trine. Until that is fulfilled or realized, then your soul is going to remain there. It's not moving until that's done, until it's actualized, until it's resolved, until it's dealt with. So also the other thing to remember is, as we're looking at Jupiter, Mercury, you can take any 2 planets in your chart and do this, just as long as you're understanding the archetypes that you're looking at. And you could be evolving at different rates relative to different archetypes or themes. You could be uh, really evolving in terms of how you want to express yourself, like we're working with this Jupiter Mercury phase. But maybe with relationships you're not that far along. It's not maybe been a priority necessarily, or you're still working through it early on, different dynamics. I know for myself, of course this is true across the board in the world, in our life, that so often we can be really conscious, aware, mature, perhaps evolved, successful, whatever it might be in one area of our life. And in another area, maybe we just feel like it's something we are always having to work on. My great example is just, I tend to talk to a lot of women that have very powerful positions, like in a company, for example, but their relationship life is just a wreck. They just um, are incredibly powerful in the world, and yet their emotional reality is the area that brings them the greatest hardship.
Mm-hmm.
So of course they're coming to figure out how to deal with that. And also typically, because they're so type A, very controlling, dominant, powerful women, they end up attracting men that they want to control, or feel probably more secure in order to be in that position. They don't want to feel vulnerable. There's a fear of being vulnerable. So in that case, that Mars Venus, maybe it'll be at a first quarter square, crescent phase square. They're just not moving along quite as swiftly. And so anyway, it's going to vary between these phases with the different planets that you're looking at. But it's a lot of fun to really dive in and be like a little detective with your chart. I used to love this when I first started getting into this at the school, and comparing with different students. We had a blast. And so it's a great way to understand the phasal relationships. I highly recommend it. All right, so let's see here. Anything else that we missed?
In terms of studying these phases and aspects, that it's always really important to look at the phase first before applying the aspect, because the aspect only can be interpreted correctly in the context of the phase. That there's a vast difference, big difference between a new phase conjunction and a balsamic conjunction. Same with squares, oppositions, and so on. So focus in first on the phase, what that phase means from an archetypical point of view. Again, as Kristin, as you said, referencing the 12 signs of the zodiac, the 12 signs, there's no difference. It's just that there's 8 instead of 12. So there's going to be a blend, Aries moving to Taurus and so on. And from there, you can then understand the meaning of that specific aspect. So it's putting everything into context.
Definitely. All right, great. Obviously, if you've got a new phase conjunction, it'll be very different than a balsamic conjunction. It's like the difference between Aries and Pisces. You cannot get more
Different.
antithetical, or what's the word? Is that the right word? Antithetical? I don't know.
Anything
And you cannot get more opposite than those two energies.
opposite than that.
But you know, it literally is like coming out of the water and into the sun. You know,
Right.
one minute you're swimming in the sea, and the next minute you're running in the sun. It's a totally different reality. Anyway, so another question is, why do we look at the coupling of Jupiter and Mercury? The phase of Mercury and Jupiter is how the soul is going about learning about the underlying evolutionary intention and purposes of how they understand their journey from a philosophical or belief system point of view, in part. Of course, the relationship to how we establish our beliefs and philosophies, which is Jupiter, can then create the necessary means of expressing those beliefs through the Mercury function. So whatever it is that we feel to be true, what it is that we believe, then we can take those beliefs and express them, just like Dave and I are doing here. We have this desire to learn more about astrology and evolutionary astrology in particular, and then we study these teachings, Jupiter, and then this is our way of being able to express what it is that we believe in, that we understand to be true, and expressing it in this form. So that's really why any soul would look at the coupling of Jupiter and Mercury. Now, Mercury, from an evolutionary point of view, you know, for any of us, is going to give names and classifications to phenomenal objects in order so we can logically sequence them in order to explain them mentally, right in our mind. That's how Mercury feels secure. So we can give names to something, so we understand them. Anybody with a strong mercurial energy in their chart, you know, and they will tell you this, it calms them down to collect information.
Right.
Whether it's reading or flipping through a magazine or surfing the internet, and all the kids now and even adults are on their little phones all the time, right? Surfing around on your little devices. But in particular, if you have a strong mercurial influence, strong third house, it will calm the nervous system down just to be collecting that information. That is just part of the nature of how you're put together, potentially. Now, the archetype of Jupiter, from an evolutionary point of view, is going to give, well, as an archetype, Jupiter has to do with how the human consciousness intuitively knows the truth of something. How that inherent knowing explains the nature of, we'll say, the phenomenal creation and why. So it's been, somebody who has an inherent understanding of, say, creation and how it was set in motion, it's just its own, and how do I say this? You've got to help me with this, Deva. So your own beliefs, or actually it's not even beliefs, it can even go deeper than that belief to a knowing. You know that it was set in motion at some point in time, and there's an understanding of the truths that inherently exist. without really being able to necessarily prove it, just to know it, to know that it was set in motion, and perhaps knowing even how on some level.
Right. So it's like that Jupiter Mercury, it's being able to express the truth as it exists without any intellectual over trappings or intellectualizations or philosophies. It's being able to express what one inwardly knows, the difference between a belief and a knowing. And that Jupiter function is tuned into that inherently. We're a part of the universe, so we should be able to intuitively tune into the natural laws that explain how creation operates. So it's the difference between a belief in something and an inner knowing.
Exactly. And I mean, I do feel that, you know, if you clear away some of the mental chatter, somebody who has a strong Jupiterian in chart, if you just stop thinking about what something could be or might be, and tune
Right.
to the intuition, that right side of the brain, or that just that those feelings about something, the truth will, especially with a strong ninth house chart, a strong Jupiterian influence, the knowing will surface, and just that understanding. And you're not even, it's one of those feelings where you don't even question it. You just know it in your bones. You just know it to be true. And it's a lot different, of course, than religion, for example, or different faiths that people follow. They may go someplace in order to feel secure, and it could be a religion, which is also Jupiter when it's in a consensus state, Jupiter in combination with Saturn, where people are teaching you things that are rooted in beliefs that are not necessarily true, which
Right.
would generate this us versus them mentality. Our
Mhm.
way is the only way. If those who don't follow what we believe aren't going to go to heaven, for example, or won't be saved, or won't be forgiven, or won't, whatever it might be for that. So uh, that is not a belief that is ultimately true. So there's also that part of Jupiter that can also exist. Anyway, back to this Jupiter and Mercury combination. It's about it, this sets in motion how we go about learning what we are going to believe in any given life, and how we then communicate it. So when you look at the chart, it will reflect, and if you think about our example here again, Deva, we went about learning about evolutionary astrology, right? And there's things about this work that have proven itself to us, and that has influenced what we believe and know to be true. And here we go about communicating it in this form. So everybody has the same Jupiter Mercury planetary combination in some position. We're not the same, but your own. And it
Mhm.
will reflect how you go about learning, what it is you're going to believe, and then how you are going to communicate what it is that you've come to believe, whether you're a consensus state, individuated state, or spiritual state. Some of those beliefs will be true and some will not, right, Deva?
Right. Right.
That. So we're not saying that everything that we know is true, but we're just doing our best to uh, communicate how these two planets work in tandem in your chart. All right.
Right.
So we've reached the last quarter phase. Let's talk about what that means to have Jupiter and Mercury in a last quarter phase.
That last quarter phase is really uh, break coming from the previous phase, the disseminating phase, where the soul is essentially learning how to function within society to essentially do that on its own terms. It's Capricorn. The last phase is Aquarius. The examples that we used were getting your certificate to then be able to do what you wanted with it, or to be able to use that in your own unique way. Now we reach the last quarter phase, and this is really where we reach Aquarius. The first parts of it are Aquarius leading to Pisces, rebellion, that the soul has learned essentially everything that it needs to learn in terms of how to integrate its purpose within a social context. And now the challenge is to decondition, to liberate. to essentially become free of that conditioning or become free from those parameters that have allowed it to operate within society, uh, in order to embrace a more Aquarian or a more alternative view, to break free from those societal concepts. Ultimately, this points the door towards universal truth, but essentially it manifests as a crisis in consciousness relative to belief systems, because the belief systems of the mainstream, or belief systems that are not in accordance with universal or natural law, are at that point all being thrown into question. It's what do I now believe now that I want to liberate? And so there's an underlying dynamic of shedding of skins, freeing oneself from dynamics that have become limited, outdated, that are linked with belief systems and paradigms from mainstream in general, and that are creating a sense of needing to rebel or needing to distance oneself from those beliefs.
Yeah, exactly. That was excellent. This is also referred to, I believe, by Dane Rujar as a crisis in consciousness, last quarter phase. Yes, you can see that up there written at midnight here on this wheel. By the way, Dane Rujar I just checked his chart today, has Jupiter Mercury in a disseminating phase. That would have been a good one to talk about, but
Oh.
yeah. Well, anyway, very well known astrologer who actually created, I believe he was the pioneer for this, the phasal relationship wheel. Anyway, so back to the last quarter though, really reminds me, think about the beginning part of this phase, very Capricorn, Saturnian energy, but there's an Aquarian element here, and it is a seed of social alienation. I remember feeling at my Saturn return, which we can, I think, all feel. Saturn return to me is a last quarter phase square, last quarter square to me. It feels like, you know, that Saturn return feeling.
Right.
So everybody knows what a Saturn return feels like. And it can really feel this way at the last quarter phase if you have this, or at the square in particular. And I remember being at my Saturn return in corporate America before I became an astrologer, which didn't happen until I was 33. But I remember saying these words, there must be more than this. I can't tell you how many times I must have thought that or said that. So what happens is you spend your whole life, or then all of your 20s, making big decisions about your future, and you get there and you're like, really? This is like, this is definitely not what I want.
Yeah, right.
So how many people start changing those big commitments that they've made, whether they're getting out of a marriage, or they're changing their profession, or they're on some search for their bliss, and completely changing the direction of their life. It's a deep time of reflection. And you can totally begin to feel like you don't fit into the world you created at all. There are new ways that you're thinking that you want to move forward that have nothing to do with the existing social sphere. And you're over it all, for sure. I know I was totally over it all. But in this phase, you would, with the Jupiter, Mercury, or any planetary, by the way, anybody or any two planets you have in this last quarter phase will feel this way. In particular, Deva was talking about beliefs and things like that, was very specific to Jupiter, Mercury. But I would say in general, there is a big psychological dilemma here for any two planets you put at that last quarter phase, because the original intent really has no meaning that you initiated at the new phase. All of a sudden you get to that point. It's, again, back to my example, I just went to college for 4 years. I just entered this particular profession, and now I'm at my Saturn return, and I'm like, oh my God, this is not where I want to be. Oh, not my original intention when I entered college or what have you. And so there is a destruction of your original purpose, which can lead to an absolute unknown in this phase. Now what do I do? Where do I go? You know, you're going to be experimenting a lot with new thought forms that lead to a new direction. And so as a counselor, what you would say to a client who might have Jupiter, Mercury in this phase, or any other two planets, Maybe they're experiencing a transit that's activating this kind of energy. You create the voice of courage, which is the Leo polarity of that Aquarius, to
Mhm.
stand on their own if necessary, to tune into your heart, to tune into your inner fire. And, that is really a powerful message for somebody who's in that place, to be a group of one, to not feel, don't worry about conforming. It's never going to fit your model of what you feel is a reflection of your own individuality. You will be unwrapping yourself in ways. What did you call it, Dave? There was a word you used for it.
A shedding of skins.
Yes, thank you. This Plutonian eliminating of the old kind of energy here. And so relative to your beliefs, that would be true. What if somebody was really involved in the Mormon church, for example, and as they get into their 20s, or maybe they're in a relationship, and maybe they've married someone who's also in the Mormon church, and then all of a sudden they're out in the world and they're exploring other beliefs and ways of understanding the world, whether it's astrology or crystals or tarot, and they're like, what am I doing? Like, I
Mhm.
felt like I was living in a, what do you call it, a glass house of sorts, and I was only allowing myself to take in what existed within these walls, and then there can be a total rebellion. And I mean, I can think of 2 or 3 clients that had that exact reality at the Saturn return. It was like, bye-bye, I'm out of here. So that can happen here. So you want to really encourage them to follow their heart, to follow the wind of their own making, and to continue to honor what feels true, within them, not according to the rest of the world or the world around them. All right. Any more thoughts on that?
It's just thinking about what you said too, that in terms of beliefs, that coaching them around really embracing being that group of one, or finding the courage to stand on the outside, because sometimes that transition can bring the security to make the break, that if they can progressively find the security to stand outside that group, to stand outside that glass house, and to follow their heart, or to be able to really see in an objective way that what they've created is what they're wanting to rebel against. They're wanting to rebel against the way that they've been structured, because it's not working anymore. So it's the courage to be that group of one, as you were saying, the courage to be the one who's on the outside, and that there's nothing wrong with that. Even if they were successful, even if people have liked them for being that way, whatever the reality is around that, it's not them, and it's not what they want. So really encouraging, really, as you were saying, igniting that inner fire to go ahead and break free, to go ahead and be that person on the outside, because that's what this phase, that's the intention of this phase.
Yeah, I have another example. I do not have Jupiter Mercury in a last quarter phase or last quarter square, but my example of this is just, leaving that corporate realm, leaving the conservative reality, and then getting into this work. And there can be a fear of being judged. People don't like it when you don't conform to their model, to their way of being, because it threatens what they feel to be secure. So
Right.
typically there will be some judgment around what you're doing. Of course, I had some fears around breaking out of that reality, because it did represent a great deal of security more within the work than anything else. But by the time I had reached 33 years old, which took, a few years outside of that Saturn return into the next Saturn square, I didn't care what people thought anymore. Like, I was for the birds. I mean, whatever's been, this is so limiting. I can't live in this reality anymore. There's so much more. It's literally like somebody who wants to explore outer space, who can't wait to get in that rocket, right? That's
Yeah.
how it felt like. I just can't wait to get in the rocket. There's so much that I want to explore. There's so much that is calling me. There's so much that is calling me home. That's what it felt. And so a lot of people with that last quarter phase, and I must have a couple planets in the last quarter phase that I'm not thinking of right now, but a lot of those people, they're going to have to feel very comfortable being on your own at times. It's part of this
Yeah.
dynamic. It's part of this energetic requirement for you
Mm-hmm.
to lose. I like to say, to leave the side of the pool, the safety of the side of the pool. You're going to have to let go of that experience of knowing that you can crawl out of that body of water, and walk on safely without risk. So there is an element, like a huge degree of rebellion that can occur here. So important to note. Oh, and I would say here too, obviously with the last quarter phase, it's a little bit like the difference between looking at the world from a religious point of view and looking at the world from an astrological point of view. You can even see a shift from Saturn to Aquarius in that respect. Just one small example of it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, anyway, some examples there. All right, well, we've got some great charts to look at to show you how this is playing out for different people that you might know about. And Deva, you picked some wonderful examples, and I'll let you take it from here.
Okay. So the first example is the lead singer of Coldplay, Chris Martin. In his natal chart, he has Pluto in Libra retrograde in the second house. He has South Node in Aries in the 8th house, conjunct Venus also in the 8th. North Node is in Libra in the second, ruled by that Venus in Aries in the 8th, conjunct the South Node. And his Jupiter is at Taurus Taurus in the 9th house, and Mercury, which is close to a square, is in Pisces in the 6th house. So from my understanding, looking at that from an evolutionary point of view, the way that he'll be most oriented towards expressing his natural voice or expressing what he knows to be true is very much centered upon embracing larger and larger truths that he can experience a sense of, I would say, with Mercury and Pisces in the 6th, and it's like a transference from uh, um, personal love perhaps to unconditional love or universal love. Uh, Looking at this Mercury and Pisces in the 6th, it's being able to embrace a larger framework so that you can really give, or that you can really give fully for yourself to experience a type of universal energy or higher calling. So I can really see this as a sense of self-preservation, or a value on really giving as much as yourself as you can, even if it means heartbreak, or even if it means pain, or whatever it brings, in order to access a higher energy, or in order to access a love that is unconditional for oneself, and for another. Um, and he has a beautiful. I really like the quotes of a sky. It's called a sky full of stars. To me, it really indicates kind of this transference into a higher calling, or really being able to embrace an inner relationship that's based upon a more universal sense of things, or a higher energy. It says, because you're a sky full of stars, I'm going to give you my heart. Because you're a sky full of stars, because you light up the path. I don't care. Go ahead and tear me apart.
That's
Um,
fantastic. Go ahead and tear me apart.
yeah. So it's really, what I really appreciate about this in terms of being able to share what's natural for him, is a sense of healing through embracing a higher path, a higher truth in general, that with Jupiter and Taurus allows him to feed or to sustain himself, and is, of course, because he's a musician, expressed through the universal language of music. Um, Jupiter being in Taurus, Mercury also being in Pisces in the 6th, and looking at the North Node being in Libra in the 2nd, the value upon giving. that he really, in his music, he really touches base with, not in a sense of sacrificing, but giving without expectation. Giving just to give and tuning into
Mm.
that higher call. That's okay if giving this love tears me apart. I mean, not in a masochistic sense, but that's okay to be able to give fully. The South Node in Aries in the past may have been somebody that was very instinctual or may not have been able to make a commitment within relationships. Seeing Aries in the 8th, there may have been a fear around that, kind of jumping in, jumping out. Seeing the Mars in Aquarius, not really fully emotionally engaged at times. So it's almost like embodying that true ability to give your heart, to give your all, in order to access a healing energy, and in order to find an outlet for personal pain that's more healing, or that's more an ability to process emotions that we all have. And so it's to me it's really inspiring because it's able to shift kind of that feeling of heartache into more being able to share this with others in a way that's healing and that tunes you into a more universal energy.
One of my favorite Coldplay songs is Fix You.
Oh,
Yeah, that one is definitely a favorite of mine. And he's got the Mars, of course, in Aquarius here in the 6th, but his Mercury in Pisces is in the 6th as well, with Jupiter in this last quarter phase. And, this is all about wanting to fix what's broken, and somebody that he loves, that he knows is suffering. So on a personal level, just what you were sharing, I think that is really well reflected here in this aspect. I can't remember
mm,
the lyrics, all of the lyrics, but I Want to Fix You, I know, is uh,
yeah,
the main, what do you call it? The chorus, part of the chorus.
right. Let's see here. Lights will guide you home and ignite your
Ah,
bones, and I will try to fix you.
ugh, I will try and fix you. So
Mm,
lights will guide you home. Wow, look at that with that Pisces, Sun, trining Uranus. And you've got obviously Jupiter in the ninth house, which I feel like is about being a guide, right? That's like your guides, your intuition too. But in that last quarter phase of Mercury in Pisces, lights will guide you home. So beautiful. Oof, that's a great one. All right, next slide, unless you want to say anything else that I missed. Oh, there we go.
mm.
Let's go to Natalie Portman. Okay, real quick. David, any more last thoughts?
Oh, that was what I had.
Okay, good. All right, Natalie Portman,
Right.
great actress, and I'll let you start this one.
Okay. In her natal chart, she has Pluto in Libra in the 12th house. She has South Node in Aquarius in the 3rd, ruled by Uranus, which is in Scorpio in the 1st house, also retrograde. And she has North Node in Leo in the 9th, ruled by the Sun in Gemini in the 8th. And her Jupiter is at in Libra in the 11th house, making a last quarter phase to Mercury being in Pisces in the 8th. So in terms of how she's going to find her natural voice, or how she's going to feel most intuitively to express what she knows, and her natural truth, would be essentially through the archetype of liberation, deconditioning, at times shock. It's very much about wanting to break out of conditioned expectations within relationships. That it's almost like in this case, which you can see in the movie where she played both the white and the black swan in the same performance. The movie called The Black Swan, where she was able to play both the light and the dark.
Uh-huh.
It's
Right.
like being able to show the counterpoint, or being able to
Yeah.
embody both of those. Like, look, here's the exact opposite of that. Is that?
Mhm. Oh my God. Yeah, that was an incredible movie.
And at this and breaking free from relationships where there was emotional suffocation, seeing the Mercury in Cancer in the 8th, squaring that Jupiter in Libra in the 11th. So it's essentially touching base with her own emotional strength, or touching base with her own inner resources to nurture herself, what helps make her feel secure during deep changes. It's like finding the power to essentially give the middle finger in the end,
Mm-hmm.
to say no. I'm not going to be the stereotype, or I'm not going to play into these, really stereotypical, because it's conjunct Saturn. And that can include gender dynamics, where there's been power and powerlessness. That what she was sharing was that because she came out as an actress when she was very young, she did experience sexual harassment from one of her first fan emails. Was essentially derogatory, and was full of uh, aggression and harassment, and that she spoke out against it, or she rebelled against it. She said, no, I should be able to play in these types of roles, because I am expressing myself without fear of being hurt.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see this too as somebody who also is rebelling against typical gender roles, and who wants to balance in the end both that masculine and that feminine, the ability to liberate, to decondition, to be able to be both the to express the masculine or feminine in whatever way is most suited for her. And she has a beautiful quote that really reflects this. She says, "I feel that both men and women should be allowed to express themselves in whatever role or in whatever way they so choose, in order to reach their potential or to become their fullest." That's the North Node in Leo in the 8th. So she gives the example of whether you want to take care of children, or whether you want to be somebody who has a career. It doesn't matter how it's expressed, as long as it allows you to really reach to the fullest who you feel you can be. Kind of again going to that North Node in Leo in the 8th. So it's absolute rebellion. That to looking at that, it can be a way to work through that. Can be expressing both the light and the dark, the extremes of things, and being able to embody both in just a very powerful way. Almost exposing in the movie The Black Swan. It was essentially becoming the exact opposite of who she had been, in order to expose how repressed she'd been, in order to expose the suffocation. She was being dominated by her mom in the film, and so that created a big rebellion against it. And seeing the trine to the South Node in Aquarius and the third, individuating through the dynamic of standing as a group of one, and also tuning into what's most appropriate for your individual nature. That's one of the strengths of the Aquarian archetype. We're all going to have a unique blueprint, something that's how we're all designed, that's intrinsic or unique to just us. And she really has a strength there of being able to demonstrate how, through the archetype of liberation and also rebellion against who we're not, we can come into contact, or ultimately emotionally connect with who we are. And that's the North Node in Leo in the 8th, is the empowering the part that we feel we do stand for, what we are connected with. A very deep rebellion against everything that is artificial, or that feels outdated, or doesn't really reflect, doesn't really give her the freedom as well to embody her potential, which is what the North Node in Leo in the 8th would want.
Yeah. Wow. She has done such a variety of just creative work, I would say, in this world of acting. One of my other favorite movies of hers, I love the movie itself and her role in it, because it was just diametrically opposed to who she was in The Black Swan, but as Jane Got a Gun. And
Oh.
she is just, excuse the expression, badass in this. She's awesome. I can't think of a better way to explain her. I mean, she does a phenomenal job in this movie. You know, uh, she's asking her ex-lover for help in order to save her outlaw husband from a gang who's out to kill him. And, you know, and she's just got to defend her home, her child, and her life, you know, like there's no tomorrow. And she just comes out swinging and shooting and everything else. And I don't know, it's a really incredible movie, but I loved her in that because it was just so different than anything that she's done before. Being out in the wild, wild west compared to like this ballet theater, you know, where you're out on horses in the dust and, you know, and then the ballet theater, there's so much makeup and everybody looks perfect and poised, and it could not have been more different. So a true test of you know, the best actors can just do anything. And
Right.
really pulled that off well. Her Mars and Gemini, you know, this ability to kind of the diversity involved in the South Node in Aquarius as well there. But that the Jupiter and the 11th with the Mercury phase here. You think about the 8th house Mercury in Cancer, and the Black Swan was perfect for that. Just the dark, you know, the black dark side of the Scorpio archetype, and the woman empowered on the stage. And then you see this too with the 8th house being, you know, defending her life, her family's life, her child's life, her partner's life in this film, Jane Got a Gun. So you can always see when someone is an actor or an actress, you can see the different roles playing out in their own chart. It's like they're reliving some parts of their past, some pieces of their past in order to empower themselves in this life. Look at that Venus and Mercury too. It's balsamic, and that Venus rules her Jupiter in Libra in the 11th house. So definitely a life with her Mercury station to recover her voice and to get her power back as a woman in the world, using her creative potential, the way that she expresses herself, and definitely to be, as you talked about, too, just the, what do you call it? Not the verbal abuse or the
Harassment.
harassment. Thank you. That was the word I was escaping me. I think she was one of the women that came forward too with the director, that Harvey, what his name?
Oh
Weinstein.
gosh, Harvey Weinstein.
Yeah. I have a hard time grabbing words today. But yeah, she was I believe one of the actresses that came forward to just to express, you know, her experience of all that. But all right, many, many women came forward.
Yeah.
So a wonderful chart here for just a woman who came to this life to get her power back in every way that she knows how. It's going to happen as a result of a diversity of experiences and roles that she has chosen. And that's also reflected here. That's excellent. All right. Thank you for that. Next chart. Tom Hanks. He's my favorite actor of all time. Love him. Okay, go ahead, Deva.
Okay. Tom Hanks, he has Pluto in the 12th house, which is conjunct Jupiter in Virgo. His Pluto's in Leo, both in the 12th, and Jupiter's new phase to Pluto. And his south node is in Gemini in the 9th, ruled by Mercury in Cancer in the 10th house. And the north node is in Sag in the 3rd house, ruled by that Jupiter. So in this case, we're looking at the planetary rulers of the north and south node as being Jupiter and Mercury. So they're going to have an emphasized role. They're going to be the facilitators of how the south node and the north, how the south node was actualized, and how the north node will be actualized in this life. So looking at this chart and seeing how he'll specifically recover his natural voice, how he'll want to express intuitive knowing or knowledge. Looking at Jupiter being in Virgo in the 12th, uh, conjunct Pluto in a new phase, starting with that, that there's a new cycle starting relative to intuition, relative to how he's able to discern what is true and what is not true. It really emphasizes, I would say, with the North Node being in Sag, more the intuitive development rather than the intellectual, seeing that the South Node is in Gemini. So it's shifting from perhaps a secretarian view to a view that's more holistic, or a view that is more universal. You can definitely see that he's had to sort out, or that what he's communicating through the movies that he does, through his filmmaking, are universal truths that really go beyond any specific belief, any specific doctrine. They have a really universal theme within them, no matter what that theme is. It's like a way of transcending uh, a limitation within the intellect, so to speak. And seeing where it's in Cancer in the 10th house, this is also accessing the emotional body, um, relative to those who have perhaps been persecuted for having maybe a special talent, those who were considered, I would say, also different, seeing the moon in the 11th. But that Mercury in Cancer in the 10th house is really wanting to articulate a sense of uh, what's internally meaningful, independent from a role. His role in the world is really based upon uh, speaking to universal themes, speaking to the underdogs, with Jupiter being in Virgo. One of his one way that he expresses this is through environmental causes. He really has a passion around preserving or protecting the environment. And he specifically does that by taking it off the market.
Oh,
um,
what do you
taking
mean?
by not making it accessible to the public. You can't buy it.
Oh, that's awesome.
And
I
that's
love
his
that.
one. Uh, and you can also see this too in terms of the movie Sully, where he was a pilot and he had to make a split-second decision around what to do with the airplane. And he knew he had to do a water landing, right? The Mercury in Cancer
Hmm.
had that emotional feeling that I'm dead in the sky.
Uh-huh.
The only thing I can do is operate on my intuition, on my feeling, and that created judgment from the authorities. That the authorities brought him in for the official, how did this happen? Are you sure that was the right decision? Causing him to doubt himself, and how he responds to that, because then they do all these simulations. Let's redo this. Let's do this in the simulator. And he's like, yeah, you know, you know what's going to happen ahead of time. So it really brings in that component
Right.
of intuition, of reacting based upon feeling or based upon internal knowledge. And that being a way to become self-secure, that being a way to perhaps counteract any rejection, or kind of receiving judgment from the experts, or those who say they know, when in fact they don't. And so it's really trusting that's one's inner knowing, the North Node being in Sag, via connecting to a universal theme, and really trusting the feeling, or really trusting what's in the emotional body, and bringing that out into the role in the world.
Yeah, that was a great example. Any other movies you got with that chart?
Oh
You've
yes.
done so many.
I would say too, one that really stuck out for me is The Green Mile,
Mm-hmm.
where he defends the person who's seen as having powers that are destructive, but really he's using them to heal. And he's able to feel that. The only reason he knows is because he knows the person, he's interacted with them, he's able to see. He's in the movie, he's the guard. He's the one who's the prison guard, and how he's using his voice, or how he's using his authority to speak for those who have been misjudged.
That was an excellent movie. I was also thinking about his chart with a Sleepless in Seattle.
Oh, yes.
Because, if you think about the last quarter phase, it can be like a trauma signature. Well, just the Uranian or the Aquarian part of it later on, where, there's some kind of shock that the soul experiences. I mean, maybe not for Jupiter, Mercury so much, but he's an actor. So he's got the Pluto, Jupiter in the 12th, which is a very strong, a lot of like Natalie Portman also had a 12th house Pluto. I think
Mm-hmm.
Spielberg has a 12th house Pluto, if I'm correct on that. But anyway, you've got the Jupiter, Mercury in Cancer, right? So there he is playing mom and dad to his boy, and his boy's trying to set him up on this, trying to get him out there, so to speak. And he is living on the water, right, on that boat.
He is.
Mercury in Cancer, and so anyway, it's all about this kind of this alternative way of meeting the girl. You think about the Aquarian part of this last quarter phase, and it's on the radio how all this happens, right? Even in that movie, it's showing up in the chart. I just think it's great. And then, it's like this, the whole movie is really, it's like heartbreak turns to, fulfilling a dream. They're what
Right.
they almost miss each other, and then they're up in New York at the, where are they?
Oh, he's in Seattle, she's in New York.
Yeah, but he's meeting her in New York. He flies out there to see
Yeah.
her, and almost miss each other. I think I
Right.
remember the exact way that all happened. But anyway, my whole point is the 12th house has to do too with, like, the dream of anything. And then of course with the last quarter phase to Mercury in Cancer, this connection to a woman, who he ends up falling in love with, which, it all happens really on the radio and then through the telephone. So anyway, I just love that movie and the way that it's reflected even in this chart. And again, another actor who's just expressing himself in such a variety of roles. There's Forrest Gump, there's Big, which was another excellent.
Oh,
Those are
yes, that's perfect for Mercury in Cancer.
films for Mercury and Cancer, like The Little Boy in the Man's
Wayne's
Body,
Band, yes.
or vice versa.
Vice versa.
Right, because he became young again, but he was really a man. That's a crack up. And typically the Cancer archetype for a man at least can be a little boy in a man's body, but he was a man in a little boy's body and Big. So all right, that was excellent. I loved all the examples. They're wonderful. Some of my favorite actors and musicians there, so that was sweet. And we're going to be back in the next month or so discussing balsamic Jupiter Mercury phase. It's the last one, the final, the 8th phase. And by the way, if anyone who's listening wants us to tackle a different planetary pair, Mars Venus or Sun Moon or Jupiter Saturn, if there's something that you're just dying to hear about through a planetary pair and you want Dave and I to go through those phases with you, let us know, and we'll discuss it and consider that for our next series. All right, for those of you who are interested in learning more about evolutionary astrology, becoming a student through correspondence course, or just being able to connect with other people in this way, please go to our website at schoolofevolutionaryastrology.com. Until next time, namaste.